Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm your host, Leslie Richardson.
I'm your host, Robert Green.
And we are joined by...
Phil Japixi.
Hey, Phil.
Hey.
How's
Sorry, the
it going?
hesitation. The other day you said my name.
Wait
Now
for it,
I'm
hurry.
looking going, I'm the guest.
We mix it up.
We totally planned this and we totally practiced. But welcome to the continuation of our mini-series on automated testing. We have spent many episodes talking about why automated testing is important. We talked about test-driven development, behavioral testing development, and we have explored different pieces, different frameworks and software like XUnit, and now we are going into a brand new space and talking about how you can mock dependencies using Mock, M-O-Q. This has been tossed around a bit throughout this mini-series, and I'm excited
Find out
to
what
talk.
MOQ stands for?
We did not. We
No.
forgot.
Oh.
So we're doing a couple episodes
Okay.
on MOQ, so I have an opportunity to check the Googs.
Excellent.
We had, or Bing, I should say. We're here at Microsoft, right? So I should search for Bing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, most of us who work at Microsoft are using Bing to search for things, not gonna lie.
Anyway, back to the topic.
Yeah.
Mocking.
So, this has been teased for a couple episodes now, so what is this?
So
What problem are we trying to
We're,
solve?
we're trying to solve a problem where there are things in our system under test that are outside the scope of what we're trying to test, right? So let's say I have a service class that is going to go to the database and fetch a record and then have some behavior based on the status of that record, right? So maybe it's a customer service app and they go find the customer based on the ID, they come back, now you've got the name, you've got their status, maybe they're an elite customer or a preferred customer. And so then you want to handle them a little differently. Maybe they get priority queue if you're calling in for a service, and maybe they're delinquent in their payments, and so maybe they get put to the end of the line, whatever. I'm just making up a scenario.
Okay.
We want to test the behavior, right? You know, based on their priority or their status, you want to have your code act in a different way, but you don't want to have to hit the database each time, right, in order to do that. It's going to slow down the test. But then also the problem is now I have to come up with a record in the database that is delinquent, another record that's preferred, another record that, you know, whatever I'm testing for. And if it's a shared database, now I could inadvertently mess up your test because I'm changing the records to satisfy my test.
So what you're saying is that if I have an app that makes a call to an Azure service talking to Azure SQL, and I want to test my code over and over and over and over and over again, I shouldn't run up my Azure bill?
Yeah,
that what you're
that's
saying?
pretty much what I'm saying.
Wow. What a thought.
But
What a
we are going to
concept.
talk about integration testing with SQL. So there is an opportunity to still run up your Azure bill if you
Good.
want to.
Okay.
Right, but we really want to turn that off for
Okay.
for CI/CD. So we'll talk about that in a few episodes.
All right.
I'm not going to say number because I was wrong yesterday. So
Numbers are
anyway,
scary.
let's look at a problem, right? And then let's use Mock to solve it. Okay. So what we have here is we have a and naming is hard, right? Naming is one of the three hardest problems in software development, right? The three hardest problems are naming conventions and off by one errors. So I just use, oh, wait for it. There we go. Off by one errors, right? So I have a method or a class called useDependency, and we're doing good stewardship. We're injecting in our dependencies, right? We
Okay.
don't ever want to you create a dependency and use it at the same time. We talked about that in the solid principles, you know, way back on the show, so you can
Yep.
search your archives for that to get a deeper explanation. So we inject it in, right? And now we're going to use it in this get customer method. Now I don't have any real logic in here, but I just want to demonstrate the problem. So one thing we could do is create a fake. And what a fake is, it's an actual implementation of that interface, but everything's hard-coded, right? So you don't have to use a mocking framework. You just create something called a fake repo. And so I've done that. So here I have a fake repo. Let's go look at the code. And it implements iRepo. And there's some methods that, oh, I spelled Fred's name wrong. So here's the find method, and it's hard-coded, right? So I can call this fake, and it'll return the value that I pass in for the ID, but it's also hard-coded to be Fred Flintstone. Right? But at least I now have a concrete class I can test with. So I can actually create my system under test because I have to pass in an implementation of iRepo. It's required in the constructor, right? So I can't have the class without it. So now I have it, and I try and exercise the code, and the problem is the name is always going to be Fred Flintstone coming back because it's hard-coded.
Right.
So now I can't test. So if the name is Fred, let's do something like this, right? Something silly. Switch. Sorry, let's do this. Right, and we had case Fred. We're gonna hit the wrong keys, right? And again, this is just a silly example. But if it's Fred, we're gonna check for some logic. If it's Barney, check for some Wilma, Pebbles, things like that, right? And we can argue whether or not you should use a strategy pattern. That's not the point of this discussion. So we failed here unless we want to create a different fake for every single situation we're passing or testing, right? And that's just going to be a maintenance nightmare.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is we want to set it up a little differently. So let's duplicate this. And we'll fix the name. And we don't need the constructors. And what we're going to do, instead of using the fake repo, we're going to create a new mock of iRepo.
It's not spelled MOQ?
It's not spelled MOQ. It is actually spelled MOCK.
And you're using...
Now you're just mocking me.
MOQ.
you did it. So you have a package. Mock is where? What?
You know what? We didn't do that. We've done it in every other one. So let's look at here. And so there's a package called MOQ.
Okay.
Right? And there's really good documentation out there if you just search for mocking MOQ or MOQ C#. I don't remember the exact search term.
Okay.
If you just put in MOQ, you're going to get a wide range of things. You want to narrow it down to C#. But yeah, so the term mock is in the, if we look at it, right, you can see that it is in the, well, you know what, we'll just do this. Right, so it is in the MOQ namespace.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want this mock of a repo. And what that does, that creates a proxy around the interface. Right, so everything that you want to mock either has to be an interface. If you're going to, you're probably not going to get into it. If you mock concrete objects, it has to be virtual. Basically, you have to be able to derive from it in one way, or implement it in one way or another, right? So it's got to be virtual. It's got to be an interface. So now when we pass this in, right, we are not going to get any name back, because let's actually step through and debug and see what happens. So we're going to debug this test. And we're going to step in. And the repo exists, right? You can see it's a mock of repo, right? And then I do an F10, it returns null. Doesn't fail, but it returns null.
Okay.
Because what we have not done is we have not told it how to behave. And that's the beauty of using mocks, is we can set them up to behave how we want to for each individual test. So I'm not creating a new fake repo each time that has a different behavior. I'm actually telling it how to behave in the test. And we're going to go deep in this shortly. But let's just solve this problem right now. And what we're going to do, and this is a totally illegitimate test. We're not doing anything real in this test except demoing the framework, right? So if people are like, what are you testing? I'm like, I'm showing you how the framework works. That's all I'm doing. So we actually have to do this a little differently, right? Because I need to get this instance. So let's get a variable. Well, that didn't do exactly, it didn't do anything I wanted it to. Sorry, keystrokes changed. All right, let's do this. So we're going to do, there's Visual Studio trying to help me out again. And it's going to be a mock repo equals new mock object, or mock repo. Now this is, type fill. Oh, why? Because it is a mock. This is why we try not to type live.
I hate typing live. It
Okay.
just freaks me out.
So what the mock of iRepo creates is, again, a proxy around the iRepo.
Okay.
But our user dependency class isn't expecting a proxy, it's expecting an instance, right? So that's why we have to use the syntax. We can do mock repo, and this is going to fail because it is in the constructor and it has to be static, right? But we pass in the mock repo.object. So let's actually fix this real quick by what we're going to do is we're going to add a constructor and we're going to move this into the constructor and all will be well. Okay, so now I have my system under test. I've got this mock in there. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up the behavior. So I'm going to say set up. And it takes an action or a func. And we're going to, what method are we calling? We're calling find. And if you want to, let's just double check. So we go here into the system under test. It's calling find. Okay. And what we want to do is then return. See, there's Visual Studio helping me out again, and it's wrong. New customer. And we want the ID equal to ID, and we want the name equal to name. So we are calling the find method, passing in this value, and then it's going to return a new customer.
Okay.
So we are setting up the behavior right here. Now if we run this test,
And that data is coming from your inline data statements above.
right, correct.
Yep.
Right, so this is, again, MLQ is used with a testing framework. Right, so we're using XUnit, continuing on from where we left off. Right, so now when I run this test, we're going to see that it passes. Right,
Cool.
because what
Okay.
we did is we said we want this to behave a certain way. Okay. So let's look at
So in a situation where you've got more than 2 columns, you're mocking a database call that's returning records or instances with 20 different columns. You could continue to do the inline data, but then you'd probably substitute something else in there to bring back fake data, right? Could
Correct.
be in an
Yeah.
array.
So we could use the method metadata that
Yeah.
we showed, and actually I have some samples of that here as we go through the MOQ.
Okay.
And to be clear, I'm not sure if it's pronounced MOQ or mock, so I call both.
Okay.
So
Mock is faster.
mock is faster, correct. So let's look at basic mocking. So we gave you a little bit of a teaser, and what I want to do is go through some concepts. In the next episode, we're going to dive deeper
Okay.
into it, okay? So I showed you some of this. So we have our arrange here. We're setting up that the find returns the customer.
Yep.
We now have our test controller. So this is the same test we just saw, okay? Now, what I didn't have in that other exercise was any asserts. So I can say they are the same because I have created my customer here. I am returning it here. So it's not creating a new customer in the app, right? Even though the real repo is. It's passing me back the instance I told it to pass back, right? So I have the same, the IDs are equal, and the names are equal, right? So this is just
Okay.
proving that we can set it up so that we're passing back the object we pass in. Now, if you have a function that is a void, right? You know, VB would be method, right? Then you don't have a return. You just set it up, right? You just say, hey, I'm going to call add record. And the difference, well, you know what, we'll get to the difference of why you would need to set it up. Because remember, when we didn't set up the function that returned a customer, it returned null, right? It didn't do anything because it's like, I'm just a proxy. I don't know what to do.
Okay.
So you can also do that with void. You can just not set it up. But then we can't check any of the behavior.
Right.
Okay. Now, this and
So just what's add record doing with the mocks? Is it literally adding a record, or is it mocking the concept of adding a record?
So add record is a method on the repo,
Okay.
right? That the mock is, no, it's not doing anything,
Okay.
right? Literally, it's just a proxy. So what I'm doing is I'm setting up an expectation that my code, or the code that is being tested, is going to call add record, passing in this instance of the customer.
Okay.
Okay? So when I call save customer, right? Save customer calls add record,
Okay.
passing in the customer. So what am I testing here? I'm not testing anything yet. I'm setting you up. Okay? Because the next step is we're going to look at loose mock and strict mock. So by default, a mock is what's called a loose mock. Okay. If nothing is arranged or set up for a method or a property, and we're going to talk about properties, setters, and getters later, then it just says, okay, I got nothing to do, right? I'm not going to throw an error. I'm not going to return anything. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just a placeholder so we don't get a null reference exception, right? And that's, if we don't declare any type, it's by default loose. So these are the exact same declarations. Now, if we have a strict mock, the strict mock, and this is what we use in real life. We always use strict mocks. We, as in Pintus Mullins and my team. I'm not saying you have to, right? But here's why. A strict mock will throw an exception if anything is called that wasn't set up exactly.
Okay.
So if you're looking for those side effects, like, hey, I called this, but this other thing got called, and I didn't know it got called, if you don't set it up as a strict mock, you won't know that other thing got called, right?
Okay.
It'll be happy because the mock says, oh, I'm here, right? No null reference exception, but it's still a problem in your code because it's behaving unexpectedly.
Okay.
So if it wasn't explicitly defined, then it'll call you out
Yes,
on it, basically.
absolutely,
Okay, cool.
right?
So is there a reason why you might want to use a loose mock then at all?
It depends on your testing strategy. You know, honestly, it's if you're doing really focused testing, and I'm making this up because we always use strict mocks, so I don't really have a good excuse to use a loose mock, but I'm trying to find one. But if you're doing laser focused testing and you don't care about the peripheral, like it's just blurry, like all I care about is this thing, then using a strict mock might add noise to your test and cause it to fail when all you really cared about was this. Right? We use strict mocks because and we're in ASP.NET Core and EF Core, so everything's injected in, right? So we've got dependencies everywhere, right? And sometimes 3, 4, or 5 dependencies going into a repo. And I want to make sure that we're not logging an exception when there's no exception, right? With the I app logger. And we're not sending an email we're not supposed to send an email, right? So we've set everything up as a strict mock, even if it's not part of the test, right? Just so we know, plus we don't want to get to null reference exception. So that's the best I can come up with is why you use a loose mock. So here, same code, right? Except what I don't have in here is a setup. Well, it's actually the same code as this for the loose. I'm not setting anything up. So when I run this, invocation failed with mock behavior strict. All invocations must have a corresponding setup. So it tells you flat out, hey, this method was called and it should not have been called. Okay. Any other questions on strict and loose? I want to make sure we get that because that's going to be important moving forward for the rest of this discussion. We're good?
Understood.
Okay. You can also do a lazy return. And we don't use this a lot, and mostly it's because I forget it's there. But this allows you to actually construct the instance being returned after the setup. So here, I create the customer, I set it up, and then I have code that's executing. Okay? And that normally, 99.9% of the time in our code, I would say 100%, but there's probably one situation that my team's watching this and going, Phil, you forgot about this. But almost always, this is fine. But there's times when it's like, I don't know at the moment of setup really what that customer value is going to look like. So I want to say, hey, I'm going to return this customer, and then it has to be created. So I've created a customer here, but you see here I'm updating the customer, right? And so I have this placeholder on the proxy, But now I'm saying, you know what? That placeholder pointed over here to this other object on the heap, or they changed the values. And then when we call that get customer, which then calls the find method, it returns the new customer. So it's a powerful construct that, and I'm sure somebody's going to comment on the show, I haven't found a whole lot of need for, but it's probably because of how I write my code. And then the last thing I want to cover in this section is async functions. So there's several ways you can do it. Really the favorite way, favorite's the wrong word, the recommended way is to call returns async.
Okay.
Okay? You're just setting this up and it's an async call and you can return async. There are two other syntaxes you can use, right? You can call .result, but if you go out to Stephen Taub's blog on await async and why calling .result is bad, I really steer away from calling .result. Same way as I don't call getAwait or getResult. So I don't like that. And then this works also, but the compiler hates it. So it's legitimate, but the compiler's throwing a warning, and I figure the people who wrote the compiler and the Roslyn checkers are really, really smart.
Yeah.
And if they're telling me don't do this, then I'm going to listen, right? I can't tell you why it's a problem. I just know they told me it's a problem, and I went, oh, I'm done. I'm out. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Any questions on what we've covered?
No, that's
Okay.
pretty good.
All right. You also have to set up, if you don't set up property getters and setters, and you have a strict mock, you're going to get the same runtime exception as if you didn't set up a method call. Okay? So there's a couple ways you can set it up. First of all, if you're just doing a get up or a getter, what is a get but basically a method call, right? It's you call something, it returns something. There's just no parentheses after it. So then you can use just setup. The problem with calling just setup is the setter isn't arranged, right? And you asked me yesterday, on a previous show, yes, we're recording in sequence, I just blew it. When would I ever use assert.throws? And here's an example to demonstrate that if I try and set the value, it would throw the mock exception because it wasn't arranged. Okay? The better way to do it is to call setup property. And what setup property does is sets up both the getter and the setter, so it completely scaffolds your property for you, so it'll behave as expected. Okay? And then you can also set in a default value. So I'm going to set up this property so I can call it, and by the way, the initial value is 5, or whatever I want to pass in. If you don't stub them out, right, and you have a loose mock, it's just like a regular function call. They do nothing. You can assign it to it. You can try and get to it. If you call the getter, you're going to get the default value for that property type. So if it's a numeric, it's going to be 0. If it's a Boolean, it'll be false. If it's a string or any sort of object type, it'll be null, right? And then you could also set up all properties. And so then I say, you know what? Stub out all properties. The default value or the initial value could be the default for the data type, but at least it's there. So then I can then call different setup or setters and getters on it. Okay. And then these are just some additional ways I can call setup get, which I don't recommend, but I can also call setup set. And this is only setting up the getter or the setter, not the opposite end. So again, really the way we want to do this is call setup property. And I think that's a good closing point for this episode.
All right.
All right.
All right. Well, that's awesome. We covered a lot. I am glad I know what you're talking about when you're referring to mock now. So that is great. So what's on the calendar for next time?
Well, we're going to go deeper into the MOQ and the capabilities of the framework.
All right. Cool.
Sweet. Yeah, so stay tuned for that. And until next time, happy coding.